International Conference on Arts and Humanities.
Good morning, everyone. I will be presenting my paper, which is part of my dissertation. So it's a work in progress, so feel free to comment on it. The title would be Sri Lanka, the Imagined Homeland, Male and Female Transnational Memory in Channa, Wickremesekera's Distant Warriors, and Chandani, Lokuge, Softly as I Leave You. A little bit about my paper, my dissertation. I'm actually looking at transnational Sri Lankan writings in English. So these are two of the novels that I've chosen. I'm looking at a few others, but these are two from Australia, which I think are quite relevant to what I'm trying to look at. So some of the things that we normally talk about when we talk about Sri Lankan or any sort of transnational writings would be the idea of memory and home, as well as the notion of homeland and how the homeland serves as a site of memories. And oftentimes these memories that we get are either pleasant or traumatic. So what this paper seeks to do is to examine both of these novels, Channa, Wickremesekera's Distant Warriors, as well as Chandani, Lokuge, Softly as I Leave You, to uncover the male and female representations of home. So some of the things that we would question is, what exactly is the notion of home for those who have left it? So the focus of the transnational writings is often people who have left their homeland, depending on what sort of situation it might be, war or job perspectives or anything of that sort. But what is home for them once they have left it? Does home remain as a fragment of a memory which is long forgotten, or is it a memory that is forever etched in their lives? So there are many scholars who have actually looked at the notion of home. In fact, another scholar that I'm actually looking at in my dissertation is Aftab Bra, where she talks about the notion of home being a mythical place of return, or home being a place of lived experiences within the locality. But for this paper, I'm actually looking at the comparison between the male and female representation. So Robin Cohen has said something which is rather significant, where he talks about the diasporic motherland and the fatherland. And in this sense, in what he's talking about, I feel that both of these novels, the focus on the transnational Sinhalese community in Australia, it's very well represented using this notion. So a little bit about Sri Lankan writings. I'm not an expert on this. I'm still working towards being an expert, so I might be wrong. So one of the things that I have found in most of the works of transnational Sri Lankan writers is the idea of the conflict. If I'm comparing it with Malaysian literature, there's really not much that we look at in terms of conflict. So in terms of Sri Lanka, you have got the colonial writings as well as the post-colonial writings. And in terms of post-colonial writings, the conflict, as in the ethnic conflict, is something that is often reflected. And one thing that I have realized is that while most historical writings tend to focus on the idea of the conflict and trauma in general, literature tends to fill the gap because it gives us an insight into the emotions and experiences of the people. So as a result of the conflict, both of the ethnic groups tend to leave the country, thus forming the diaspora, which is why I've chosen to look at transnational writings. So Robin Cohen, a little bit about what he has said, he basically discusses the complex interplay between the feminine and masculine version of homeland. So you have the motherland and the fatherland. The motherland is perceived as the female rendition, where it is, it is basically very nurturing and caring, similar to how a mother would care for a child. And the fatherland is seen as the place where the people are warriors. They are fighting for the sake of the country. So the motherland is more of the warm, soft representation, whereas the fatherland is seen as the place where you need to defend. You are a soldier. And another thing that Robin Cohen talks about is he borrows from the German definition of citizenship and belonging, where he talks about the law of blood, where he says that descent is more important rather than the place that you're born or where you have lived for a long time. So, for example, if I'm looking at myself, my grandfather is from Sri Lanka, but my father was born in Malaysia. But I carry a Sinhalese name, my last name. So, if I'm looking at this concept, it doesn't really matter that I live in Malaysia, but my descent comes from here. So if I'm looking at what Robin Cohen says, it would be that my emphasis would be to look at my descent rather than the nation where I have grew up in. Am I making sense? I hope I am. Alright, so a little bit about the first novel. I would like to apologize because some of the words that they have used in this novel are rather offensive, so please don't take any offense. Look at it in a very literary aspect. The novel centers around the efforts of the Transnational Sinhalese community in Melbourne who are protesting against the Transnational Tamil community. So it's basically, you've got both the ethnic groups that are living there, but the focus of the novel is more on the Sinhalese community who are against the idea of a fundraiser that's being held. And as a result of that, you can see that the way they imagine Sri Lanka comes off as a very strong, aggressive military stance. So these are some of the quotes that I've included, and this is what the main character, his name is Ral Sanivaratne, these are some of the things that he's saying to his other friends when he's trying to get them to come together. And he basically conducts a meeting at his house where he discusses that it is necessary for us to rescue our hallowed motherland. Now here he uses the word hallowed motherland, but you can see the way he is behaving, the way he speaks, the mannerism that he projects in terms of the character. It is a very aggressive manner. So it echoes what Robin Cohen is saying in terms of the concept of the fatherland. And another thing that I noticed is that there was a generation gap in the sense that the older generation were all prepared to fight against the enemies of the land, whereas the younger generation, they found it difficult to relate to what their elders are doing. So you have another character, his name is Priyanka. He represents a younger generation in Melbourne, and for him, he said saving the Sinhala nation or fighting terrorism were meaningless things to him. So occasionally he heard about the problem that was being discussed, but it held no interest for him. So you can see that as the generation progresses, as they get older, you can see that the idea of the homeland is growing distant. Okay, the other novel that I'm looking at is Chandani Lokuge, Softly as I Leave You. This novel is about a Sri Lankan woman who leaves Sri Lanka to study in Australia, and then she chooses to settle down there with an Australian. And basically for this novel, the representation of the homeland is very different compared to the first novel, because here you have, despite leaving the place, she's very, very well rooted in Sri Lanka, where the memories of the place are, even though you have the negative, the war and the trauma there, but she doesn't let that govern her feelings, as opposed to how the characters in the previous novel are. So this is one of the quotes at the beginning of the novel, but as she progresses, you can see that there is a difference. Like, she talks about, this is one of the conversations that she has when she goes back to Kandy to visit her family, and you can see that the memory of Homeland for her, it reflects the pain, similar to what the first novel does, where they do talk about the trauma and the pain and the suffering, but at the same time, she converts it in a different way. One of the ways that she uses it is, this is what her father says, but one of the things that she does is she continues to express her love for her nation through literature, through art, as well as through her aid that she gives out towards the orphanages in Kandy. So you can see that, in both novels you have the idea of fundraising, but here it's more of, helping rather than perpetuating the conflict that is going on. And you can see that the stance that she takes is a very soft, warm sense of emotion that she has towards her homeland, where she's teaching her son or even her husband about the land, about the language, about the literature, about the food and the culture. Whereas in the other novel, they have the culture, the dancing and all of that, but there's nothing so much about pleasant memories of the land, which is a contrast. So another thing about the passion about her heritage, she also bestows it upon her son, who also shows interest in the glass cabinet. There's a glass cabinet that she keeps, which contains all of significant Sinhala literature for her. So she carries that with her to her new place, and although Melbourne has become a new place for her, it is, a home for her. She takes Sri Lanka with her through that glass cabinet. So you can see that, she transfers this onto her son, who represents the younger generation, and you can see that there's a difference. In the first novel, the younger generation seems to be very distant, but in this one, you can see that, the boy, because of the fact that his mother has taught him all of these things, he continues to, embed all of that information into his work. The historical sites, the temples, the architecture, he chooses to put all of that in his work as well. And of course, his mother is the one who's persuading him, but you don't see any reluctance from him. So you can see that, the representation of the motherland and the fatherland, where when Sri Lanka is represented as a motherland, the warmth and all of that, you get more positive, the effect is more positive onto the younger generation. However, of course, you have something that happens in the novel here, the second novel. Their world is shattered when Arjuna is mistakenly accused of supporting terrorist acts through the funds that he has raised for the war relief. So, like his mother, he continued to raise funds to help orphanages, but that was misunderstood as him funding terrorist acts. And as a result of that, he is brutally attacked, and at the end of it, when he dies, his mother starts to feel a sense of unhomeliness towards her land. So you can see that she tries to let go of the Sri Lanka that she felt had betrayed her. So again, you can see the idea of trauma that is very evident in terms of representation of home, which is why she says that's when she starts to realize that perhaps because she could not get rid of that trauma that seems to be coming hand in hand with the notion of home, if she had not done if she had not given that to her son, if she had not taught him or put him into that whole idea of Sri Lankanness, then perhaps he was able to, he would have been able to grow into a hybrid of two different cultures, and he would be free. He would not have died. Basically, overall, what both of the novels show is the idea of homeland, and they lay an emphasis on raising funds for the people, but in the first novel you see a hostile reaction, whereas in the second novel it starts off as a very positive reaction, but towards the end it changes. And my focus is not so much on how, what in terms of the ethnic relationship, it's nothing on that, but rather on the concept of fatherland and motherland, and how the fatherland seems to be represented in a more aggressive manner, and where you see the characters of Senivaratne and his friends who are willing and ready to fight to defend the honor of their fatherland. Whereas in the other novel, you see she's able to capture the memories of her homeland, where the land is seen as warm and full of affection, similar to what a mother would give onto her child. And her son, both of them, she and her son maintain close ties to the motherland through their frequent visits, as well as through their love of the language and literature. So again, the motherland becomes a place that nurtures and enables the characters to grow into people who are aware of their culture and heritage. And in this sense, you can see that despite being away from Sri Lanka, you can see that the trauma is something that never actually leaves them, but the male representation is more aggressive and unfriendly, whereas the female representation, despite the trauma, they still have a warmer representation of home, where it becomes a place eventually at the end of it. She realizes that it's a hybridity It's a sense of hybridity where she embraces her Sri Lankanness and her husband Chris's Australianness. So it comes together and she realizes that there's no point of holding on to the trauma. So ultimately it can be said that both novels, both writers, are able to provide an insight into the lives of transnationals in Melbourne, who in their own respective ways hold on to the idea of the imagined homeland, where either blood is spilled for the fatherland or the nurturing milk of the motherland lingers in their memories. Thank you.